Hello and welcome to I'm a Fan of That. My name is Ollie and I'm here with my wonderful co-host.
I'm Vivian Asima.
Yay, we're here. And we are here to talk about the fandoms that we love. We started the premise right back in series 1 with objects that represent those fandoms, and we've sort of dropped off on that. At this point, I think we're just talking about fandom topics, and that's okay. That's fine. Every so often we might have an object.
I was looking to see if I had an object in grabbing range that would have represented this, and I just don't think so.
I fear the physical media problem is happening with this one because I've only ever been able to interact with this thing on streaming. Haven't even really been able to go and see it on the big screen, which is a problem. So yes, it would be very difficult to represent this one in an object in this precise moment. But that's okay. And maybe a comment on our current media landscape. I don't know. Maybe we should go into that at some point about how nothing's physical and people are going back to physical media. You know, that would be an interesting conversation. But not for today. Not for right now. Because right now we're talking about mine and Vivian's favourite thing, detective fiction. Specifically,
Yay!
The Knives Out movies, which I think we've hinted at a million times.
I'm sure we have danced around this topic. I think we have danced on this topic a couple of times, but surprisingly never given it its own full glory.
Yes.
I don't know why. But
both of us love it. Both of us engage in it a lot. Like, I literally, I should have used this. Behind my screen right now are 2 copies of the complete Sherlock Holmes books. On top of one another.
I've got a collection of Agatha Christie stories, but they're all downstairs, so...
Yeah, I've got Murder on the Orient Expresses right there. So, you know, that there is detective fiction nearby, at hand, you know?
I wasn't sure if you were going to be leading off this, your intro in a very terrible Southern accent.
No, because I can't even do that. And I won't attempt to. I feel it would be bad for us all. I can't even do what Daniel Craig does in the movie.
Because Daniel Craig doesn't do a Southern accent.
No, Daniel Craig is doing something.
He's doing Daniel Craig. He's doing Benoit Blanc, and that is what he does.
I love the idea that at some point as a character, and we will go back onto topic in a second, that Benoit Blanc in universe decided he needed to be more interesting, and so just developed this accent. And now it's just how he talks, because you know when people start saying like a word out of like as an ironic thing and then it's sort of stuck.
Oh, you mean my entire vocabulary?
Yeah, exactly. And they start, you know, and I think that's what happened is he started doing it as like a bit because he wanted to be interesting and cool, and he now can't remember how he used to talk. This is not, you know, I think that's what it is. It's just he's like, fuck that, I'm stuck with this now. You know, because I just think either that or he was initially from the southern states of America and has moved around the world so much that his accent has become some sort of polyglot accent. That's the only other thing I can think it is that, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard, there's a TikToker, does reels as well. She's from Texas, and to start with she had this really strong Texan accent, but she moved to Yorkshire, to Leeds. And now she's been there for 10 years and her accent is just so odd because it's Leeds and Texas at the same time. And I've never heard anything like it. I mean, she's really interesting and it's fascinating. She talks about her life, but it's like, is that what's happened to him? you know, I would love an in-universe explanation at some point.
As your resident American who has moved.
It doesn't happen, you know.
It's
but you didn't move to Leeds.
Well, I'm married to a Yorkshireman from around that area.
True. That's true. Yeah.
But no, he doesn't have that kind of accent either, to be fair. I've had my American family have told me that I speak with an English accent, which every single time I bring that up to anybody that I know in England, they think that is hysterical, the idea that I am speaking with an English accent.
No. I can see that maybe it's softened, that maybe your accent compared to your family's accent may have softened in ways, but that's probably the only thing I could probably say.
I think it has probably softened a bit, and I match the cadence of an English phrasings, and that means that English people can now understand me when I talk to them, and for some reason my American family thinks that I'm speaking with an English accent.
But yeah, so that's my before we get into like a proper deep dive about Knives Out, that's my headcanon. Is one of two things, and it may be both at the same time, that he just has this weird conglomerate accent that he's picked up, and it's because he thinks it sounds interesting that he's added to it and changed it and all that kind of stuff. That's my reasoning for how bad that accent is, and not that Daniel Craig can't do the accent he's aiming for.
I can't remember if it's true or not, because it's one of those like you hear on a phrasing gossip thing about how the actual set worked, but in the first Knives Out, that apparently Rian Johnson noticed that his accent, Daniel Craig's accent, was getting more and more crazy the more takes that you would take, so he would purposefully throw away takes so that way he would basically be waiting until it was the craziest variant and then would actually like take the take seriously.
This seems like the sort of thing Rian Johnson would do, given what we know of him as a human being.
Which I just love the fact that he was like, wait, let's do this again 8 times so we can like really capture this moment.
Because there are moments where it is a lot crazier than others. There genuinely are. And it's just like, okay, let's before we get to we take this into just discussing everything we love about Knives Out. Let's do the proper thing of, if you haven't seen Knives Out, what the hell are you doing? Go watch it. Like, they're great. And for those of you who have, pause it right now, pause the podcast, go and watch it and come back, because it's that good. I am going to tell you to do
we
that.
are probably going to be spoiling plot lines because it is a mystery, and it is very difficult to talk about a mystery without any kind of spoilers. So if you care about that thing, go and watch them. Come back to this. We'll be here waiting for you. Yeah. It's fine.
So if you haven't gone and done that, we are now going to spoil them for you. The basic premise of these movies, they are detective fiction. They have a detective character who solves mysteries, and in almost all cases, Benoit Blanc, while being the detective, much like in Poirot or particularly, I think, the Poirot and Marple books, but in many detective, and I'm going to say detective as opposed to crime, because they are different. That the detective is not necessarily the main character. They are the detective, and therefore they are in the story. They are the thing that carries much of the solving of the case, but they aren't necessarily the main character of that particular story. And Knives Out does this really well by giving us a new lead every single time, with the first one being the nurse. The second one is the sister of somebody else of the murder victim, and the third being a priest who has been framed for murder. And in all of these cases, these are people who are struggling with various different things. The main characters of each movie is Marta, who is the nurse to the murder victim. The second movie is Helen, who is posing as her sister Andy, who is also the murder victim. And then the third movie is Father Judd, who is the priest who is accused of killing, again, the murder victim. So these are all, every single time the character has some connection to the murder victim beyond just being a member of the family or something like that. They tend to be someone who is very close to them in one way or another, and almost always an outsider to the group where the murder victim comes from as well. So for the first movie, Marta is obviously the nurse and not a member of this wealthy family who she is working for. And in the second movie, Helen's sister Andy is friends with all these very wealthy people, but Helen is not part of that group. And they were coming back together after a long time of not knowing each other, aren't they?
Apparently they meet up every so often.
And then in the last group, Father Judd is new to the community. He's the new priest who's come into a community that's sort of failing in its faith under the person who's there, that they've needed, that he's been brought in for that purpose and nobody trusts him because of that, So it's quite interesting that these are very distinct setups to a murder mystery style series, very definitely a detective style series, and that Benoit Blanc, our wonderful detective, is also always an outsider, very distinctly an outsider in these cases, and finds himself there in one way or another through shenanigans. He's brought in, and it's quite. They really do set him up like Poirot, and I love the fact that this is a series, that it's not, each one's a self-contained thing. They're not like, trying to do too much. They're not trying to be like, this is going to run over film with one big story. No, they're all individual stories, and we get bits and pieces about Blanc as a character, building up an image of who he is, which is quite interesting, while also at the same time he remains quite enigmatic. I think you don't, a bit like Poirot or Marple, bits and pieces about them, but you don't know everything about them. I think that's very important to the character of the detective. I think Columbo's a bit like that too, and Sherlock Holmes is. You get bits and pieces of who they are, but you never get everything. Rian Johnson understands this genre to a level that I don't think many people, outside of, I think, actual detective fiction writers, like writing books.
I think even some of them don't know it.
Yes, but his love for it and his understanding of it is so incredibly in-depth that I think he's created a modern classic with these films. I really genuinely do, that he has brought us our next great detective in the mould of, your Poirot, your Columbo, your I think Benoit Blanc fits very much into that mould.
Yeah.
But I know that you have a lot of opinions about these movies.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that we have lots to say.
We were just talking about this in regards to New Girl, about how sometimes people who enjoy a thing will just kind of look at the makings of the thing and then copy it and paste it somewhere else and not really understand the more important dynamics of the story and why something is the way it is and what it's functioning as. And I find this a lot with detective fiction, and it's why I've actually been really struggling to read a lot of contemporarily written detective fiction, because I find a lot of them are doing not detective fiction the way that Rian Johnson is doing detective fiction, or the way that Agatha Christie did detective fiction, or the way that Sherlock Holmes was detective fiction. Like, it is... They center it on the detective still, and you learn these like really deep rooted information about them as people, and they're fine stories, but they're not detective fiction the way that I think a lot feel them.
Yeah, a lot of what people would class as modern with these stories, I think, are actually more akin to your noir stories, which are not detective fiction. Noir and detective fiction are cousins.
Yeah.
But they are not the same thing. Noir is much, much more centered on the main character being the detective, and you get information. But even then, you don't get that much information. Particularly in classic noir, you don't learn that much. You get bits and pieces, and you build it up over several books. Like if you think about Sam Spade, for example, you learn about him over a period of time. Whereas I do feel like there's a modern urge, and I think it comes from things like Rebus, particularly like the kind of detective crime fiction of the 80s and 90s that was really much more about the nature of the detective and the crime, and it's much more cerebral, which I don't think real detective fiction, and we can argue about when that starts and when it finishes, but its golden age is very certainly the turn of the century into the 1950s. That's those 50 years, I would say, is the golden age of detective fiction. And it's just very few writers are doing that.
Yeah, and I think
just really,
one of the things that I think Rian Johnson is really good at is he has a nostalgia for the Golden Age detective, and even though he obviously wasn't alive during that time, neither was I, and I have a nostalgia for it too, so like I get it, I'm with you. And I think that he's really good at pointing out this nostalgia while also making it feel not like a replication. And maybe it's because he does understand all of the elements of how it works and why it works, and putting in things that are helpful to the story but not necessarily the plot, and which is all so important to writing. And like in the third movie, Wake Up Dead Man, with Father Judd, there is a scene where he's talking about a particular classic detective book called The Hollow Man by Dixon Carr. And Father Judd goes, "Oh, I recognize that book. It's from a reading list." And there was a book club that they had that was all locked room detective stories. And it shows the list of like 5 or 6 books. And they are all from that era of time. There's like 2 or 3 Agatha Christie's on there. There's like, it's all those really classic detective stories, locked room mysteries, and the Hollow Man ends up becoming a much bigger part in the story, but all of them have a reference in the actual story that is being told by Rian Johnson, including my favorite, which is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. It is one of my favorite Agatha Christie's ever written, and
I think it's one of the best detective stories ever
so
written.
Good. And
I mean,
there is a twist in why, like, how you figure out who did it so early on is revealed at the end of like how you could have figured it out, and they use that trope in the movie, which is so good.
And I think the other thing that Rian Johnson is really clear, if you're somebody who does love that period of time within, that the golden age of detectives, is that you can see how it's not that he's just referencing Agatha Christie, which I think is something that a lot of the time people fall into. They think, I want to write an Agatha Christie. And yes, she is, she's the queen, obviously. But he also, he references Sherlock Holmes, which is an obvious one as well. But he's also referencing things like Lord Peter Wimsey in there, which nobody fucking does. You've got references to, like, there's Tintin references in there, which I will argue it counts within that period of the golden age of detective and questionable writing. But, you've got that sort of stuff in there. He really understands that this genre is not just one writer. It's a series of writers doing slightly different things and understanding it in slightly different ways, and also understanding that it comes from like a pulp fiction background as well, that a lot of that pulp fiction and noir is also part of this, even though they are a sidestep from it. Like, you can really see that he knows this, because it means he's not making those mistakes. He's not making the pulp fiction and noir mistakes because he understands them.
Yeah,
you can literally watch him sidestep them. If you take your time, particularly on the first movie, you can see it almost, where he's like, we could fall into this, but we're not going to.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. And I think the amount of reading he must, I would love to see his bookshelves. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, what are you reading? Because I bet he's reading writers that, like, we have never heard of or have forgotten about, or, haven't touched on as much, because, they're just not as known in the zeitgeist. But he clearly really, really gets it. Or he's just got all of the Agatha Christie's in a row, and we just have to be like, damn,
Yeah.
Like, that's his shot. He just has an Agatha Christie library. But because Benoit Blanc he's not Poirot. He's not Poirot. And yet at the same time, there is something of the Poirot there, that quirkiness, that kind of, I'm here. I'm going to solve a crime and then I'm going to leave. And there's a wonderful joke that I saw on Tumblr where people are like, I can't believe someone was complaining about how many Knives Out movies they have been already. Why aren't they, why are they making more? And someone else replied to it like, he hasn't even solved a murder on a boat yet. Like, come on, we've got to do a boat, a train, a proper, like, locked room mansion mystery in a, like, I know the first one is technically that, but you know what I mean? Like, a real, like, that kind of feeling. We haven't done them properly yet. We've got to keep going. He's not been to a small English village yet, guys. Keep going.
I think So there's a really interesting way that he plays with the nostalgia of the time that I wanted to talk about briefly, because nostalgia is a really fascinating study in and of itself, and I am kind of on the outskirts of it. There are people who have spent a lot more time than me researching this, but I did want to talk about this, which is there's two types of nostalgia that people talk about. There is restorative nostalgia, which is I think what a lot of us are typically encountering in our day-to-day life, particularly in the politics that we are surrounded by, unfortunately. Yes. Restorative nostalgia is the idea of the attempt to actually return to the time that we are nostalgic for. So I am nostalgic for my childhood, so I'm going to try to return everything in my life back to how it was when I was a child. That kind of mindset. It's the Make America Great Again thing. Then there is then there is reflective nostalgia, and reflective nostalgia is basically an understanding that you can't go back to the thing that you are nostalgic for, and a realization and a knowledge that the thing you're nostalgic for might not have ever even existed. So if I'm nostalgic for my childhood, I can't go back to that because I'm not going to be a child. What I am nostalgic for is the fact that I didn't have to pay rent or worry about a mortgage or think about meal planning and putting grocery lists together and all that extra stress. I could just ride my bike and enjoy life. I can't do that as an adult. Like, that's just not something that is humanly possible. And so why try? There's no attempt to return because it's not a real thing that you are returning to. And one of the things that Rian Johnson is doing that really fascinates me is that he is in the restorative, right? Like, he is very nostalgic for this time period, but he doesn't want to go back to the 1920s, 1930s. His movies aren't set in that time period. They're not trying to replicate that time period. They're replicating now, but they are shining lights on the restorative type, the ones that do want to go back, and showing just how problematic and terrible that is, and how you can't go back, and we can only live in the fiction space. And he's doing that through fiction and through nostalgia, and it's such this beautiful interweaving of it in order to make commentary on itself, but also on the versions of it that I think can lead us down a bad route.
So one of the reasons why I say that I don't feel like he is just doing Agatha Christie is to do with the fact that his lead characters, so Marta, Helen, and Judd, are not necessarily characters you would find in Agatha Christie. And bear with me, as the character who is the Poirot's assistant type character. Agatha Christie doesn't tend to have those characters there in quite the same way. They are there, but these people are very distinctly... Poirot is the outsider, Miss Marple is the outsider, whereas Marta, Helen, and Judd are the outsiders in their situation as much as Benoit Blanc is, which is actually more akin to Sherlock Holmes. That the people who come to Holmes for help are almost always people who do not belong in the situation they're in, and that's why what's happening is happening to them. They are newcomers, they are outsiders, and that is more similar to Holmes than it is to Poirot. Not exclusively, obviously, but it is a generalisation that when you look at these stories, that tends to be the case. Whereas with Agatha Christie, it's more, particularly with Marple, these are more kind of Marple coming into a closed situation where everyone knows each other, or they kind of all belong to the same kind of group, and it's less like, again, I haven't read all of them, I will bow to your knowledge on those, but I have read all of the Sherlock Holmes books, and does that kind of outsider character of the nurse, of the priest who's come new to the situation, the sister who's looking for, solving her murder, they are the people who come to Holmes. And that I find very interesting, that that's the case. That's why I think that and again, I think it's his understanding, like you said, he's not trying to be nostalgic and return to this. He is taking people who are outsiders, who need help in these situations, and shining that light onto people who suck so much.
Yep.
They all suck so much in some way. And they're almost always wealthy. They're almost always people who are the top of the pile kind of types, and the person who is looking for help is not. And that tends to be more similar to Holmes, which I find very interesting. And that's why I think he has we go back to the thing of him really understanding it, and why he's not nostalgic for it, but he's representing it, because he's representing what is happening now. Is these top of the pile people who are taking advantage of those who cannot get help, and he is putting a character in who can help, who can restore justice in some capacity, because Benoit Blanc is very much that person. I think it's very interesting that he's gay, and he's older, and he obviously has... if you take Daniel Craig's age as well, Benoit Blanc is a man who will have lived through the AIDS crisis, which is something that people do not talk about in regard to him enough, because he is a gay man who must have lived through the AIDS crisis and is now happy and married and settled and wants to help people. That is something that, whether Rian Johnson or Daniel Craig realises or not, is informing his character. And I think they leaned into that more in the most recent movie,
yes.
in Wake Up Dead Man. That's why it kind of makes sense that he, like Poirot, a character who is a outsider, like Sherlock Holmes, who is an outsider, that they are, and Marple as well, they have something in their past that never necessarily gets talked about, because I don't think we necessarily go deep dive into the fact that Poirot is an immigrant who escaped war, despite the fact that, oh my god, what's his name?
Kenneth Branagh
desperately wants to lean into that for some reason. Give Poirot a tragic backstory. He keeps doing it. He
tried to make him straight, and I have such a problem with that.
How is Poirot... Another point, is any detective straight? And I don't think they are. But that's another point. And I think that, again, it shows you that he's not leaning into that form of nostalgia, because he understands that those people would never have been nostalgic for the time they lived in. You know, I doubt they'd have gone... I doubt Poirot is going, oh yeah, no, I really loved that. You know, he doesn't talk about it. He doesn't want... It's not part of who he is.
Yeah, because the thing is that he was a very decorated, highly accomplished police detective. That's what he was. He was the police guy. And then he couldn't do that job anymore. And he was forced to leave. And he was suddenly in the very first Poirot book, he is living in a group house with all the other Belgian immigrants, and people who knew him in Belgium are surprised to see him there, because that's not where you find somebody like that, which also has a lot of commentary on what people think of immigrants.
And I think this is why what you were saying about the nostalgia thing is why Rian Johnson really understands what he's doing. About, he's not harking back to that time, he's taking those same conversations that those books are having, which isn't in your face, but they are having it, and placing it into these movies. He has such commentary in these films, and you could look at them at surface value. They're lovely detective stories, and he understands the level of the detective story where you help somebody who's in a difficult situation, all that kind of stuff. But he really understands the time in which he is setting them now. He gets it. He really understands what he's talking about, because he understands the detective fiction, and that detective fiction is almost always a commentary on the time in which it is set as well. He is making those comments. Like I mentioned Lord Peter Wimsey, which I think is a detective that not many people have really come across, who is, by his name, obviously a wealthy aristocratic man. Except those books have a very distinct conversation about women's rights within the 1930s. Because one of the main characters, who then becomes a continuous main character, is a woman who was unmarried and ends up in a very, very difficult position to do with her legal status, to do with a man who she is accused of murdering, who she was living with but wasn't married to. And there is so much of those books that is talking about things like that. And that's really interesting, because that's a really distinct conversation to have about that. We talk about Poirot being an immigrant and that conversation, and Miss Marple being a spinster, and what does that mean? All of these things. Sherlock Holmes is very clearly a queer neurodivergent man. I don't necessarily think that Conan Doyle recognised that was what he was writing, but it is, and it's like, those are characters who have a different life path, and so they are never going to be nostalgic for the past, Benoit Blanc is not going to be nostalgic for a past where he struggled. He's never going to side with those people who are, and he is there for the little guy. Sorry, it's been a ramble, but it is interesting when you put something that heavily revolves around a level of nostalgia and then have it be that the people in it, the main characters in it, are not going to be nostalgic for, that. They are the people who are very definitely not.
He's so good at knowing the way that the structure of the whodunit works, which is on an interplay of multiple narratives on top of each other. So on its most simplistic, a whodunit is two narratives that are interwoven. It's both fragmentary. One is the story of the murder, so the person who did it, why they did it, how they did it, that whole story. And the second one is of the detective solving it. And something like Columbo plays those narratives where it's the one and then immediately followed by the other. But most whodunits are interwoven, where you are slowly uncovering what one of the narratives actually was while going through the other. So they both can't survive on their own. They need the other narrative in order to be a full story, because they're not full stories in and of themselves. So they're interplaying narratives. Rian Johnson kind of ups that. I think every narrative or every movie has more than two going on.
Yeah.
And he loves to take the moments that would normally be a typical shift of act in a, like, if this was written as a book for detective fiction, and instead use that as a way to shift the actual genre that you're watching. He does this in Knives Out tremendously, where it starts out as a really classic whodunit, you're in this mansion, and then it comes into become a, how can she get away with it? Because we think that Marta did it, and Marta thinks Marta did it. And so you're watching her try to get away with it, and you're rooting for her. You want her to get away with it. And suddenly Benoit becomes almost the antagonist, because she's trying to fool him, but also help him at the same time. And then it gets flipped again, and then becomes another level of whodunit. And he loves doing that. And he does that in Wake Up Dead Man as well. I said that he uses the classic reveal in The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And part of that is narration. And the beginning of the movie is being narrated by Father Judd. And it turns out that's because he has been writing a piece for Benoit to read. And Benoit can read that and knows that he's hiding something. And it starts to be like, oh shit, we can't trust Father Judd. It makes us suddenly question who we are trusting and why, even though we have no reason to not trust Father Judd.
Yeah.
And in fact, what he does is actually a really beautiful act that he does, where he protects the murder victim, but not really for the murder victim. It's for the other people, so that way they don't lose their faith, which is a really beautiful thing to do for people who hate you.
Yeah. I think as well, particularly, I think the second one, as much as I do enjoy Glass Onion, is probably the weakest of them currently. Despite the fact had I think it come out first, it would be, it's still such a great movie. And it's interesting that you could have a great movie and it be the weakest because the others are so good.
I know.
One of the things I absolutely adore about Glass Onion is that when you watch it a second time, you can see every single action he says happen. Mm-hmm. They are there and they are happening in the background. And the misdirect and the understanding that thing, like, because he really pushes you to look in different directions. And again, it's because he's putting all those stories and layers on top of each other that you're looking for something else. You're not looking where the camera is. And it's because he's done that thing of layering stuff that you are misdirected. And that's genius. See, to use the story as misdirection is so clever.
One of the reasons why I didn't really get on with Glass Onion when I first watched it is I wasn't misdirected. So I was just confused as to why, like, things weren't, being presented in a certain way or weren't being picked up on, because I was like, but he gave him that glass. Like, I saw that happen. What are you talking about? And then when it was like a reveal thing, I was like, oh, were we supposed to think something different? Oops.
And I think it's interesting because I think you weren't the only person that happened with. And so I think that's why it is possibly the weakest, is because it didn't quite work. Whereas in Wake Up Dead Man, they nailed it.
Yeah.
They absolutely nailed it with that misdirect. And it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. It doesn't change the fact that it's well done.
I think the thing is, because I rewatched it recently because I was doing I was doing a video essay. I have now done 3 video essays on Knives Out series, and I am in the middle of writing a 4th because this is my life now. I'm basically just becoming a Rian Johnson channel. It's just what's going to happen. But basically, I was rewatching all of them. When we rewatched Glass Onion, I think I had a different appreciation for it because the other 2 are presenting murders that are very clever. And the second one, the whole point of it is that it's not clever. And I think once I kind of knew that going into it, it became a better story because the whole point of it is that it's not interesting or new or complicated. It's just
who
stupid.
Thinks they're clever. Yeah, it's just stupid. Like, it's somebody. And I mean, obviously, it's very heavily a commentary on certain people.
Yes.
Person. I think it's just Rian Johnson going, I want to murder Elon Musk, and this is how I do it. But it definitely feels like he's making a very specific commentary on people who are told they're geniuses, who are told they're clever, and play all these games and all this sort of stuff. And I mean, it's even shown to you right at the beginning when Benoit Blanc solves the very complicated puzzle that he's meant to not be able to solve, and he's like, yeah, that was really easy.
Yeah.
You know, and everyone else is like, but how did you do that? And it's because essentially somebody who wants to make themselves think that they're clever has surrounded themselves with people who are stupid. You know, that's kind of what has happened. And it's a very interesting take on detective fiction to have it be, this isn't clever. This isn't clever at all. This is dumb. It's so stupid. It's just stupid, like he says, you know.
Yeah.
That there's no trick to it, apart from the fact that someone thinks there is. That other people think there is, you know.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with a lot of the characters in that is that half of them are stupid, and I think the other half have convinced themselves of that cultural narrative that we have in capitalism, that if somebody has a lot of money, it must mean that they're a genius and that they're really clever, and because that has to be the reason why, because if it isn't, then we have to acknowledge that capitalism sucks and is a luck game, and there is no meritocracy, that we have been lied to, and that is a hard pill to swallow sometimes for people who haven't come to this conclusion yet. And I think,
and it's certainly the commentary of these movies every time.
And so I think those characters in particular, in order, if they were to admit to the fact that this person is just dumb and not clever and not a genius, then they would have to acknowledge that whole host of that whole cultural reality. And it is far easier to just pretend that he's smart than to have your entire worldview dismantled.
And I think it also, when you then look at the third one, when Father Judd chooses to protect the murder victim for their faith, it's kind of because it's the opposite. That person was terrible. You know, you know, he is terrible, and he's using these people and abusing their faith, and they've convinced themselves that their worldview is to convince themselves that this will help them, this is worth doing, again in that same kind of image of, it's better if I convince myself even though I know that he's bad. And Judd's choice to protect them from that saves their faith, gives them a new way to live. And I think that's really interesting, as when you compare it to Glass Onion, where you just want, the whole point is you want to shatter it, right? You want to break the glass, you want to, you know, to destroy the thing, because that's the better, you should know that this person is a fraud. Whereas in, you know, Wake Up Dead Man, it's, if you know this person is a fraud, how much are you going to lose, as opposed to, should we just acknowledge that this person was human and made mistakes, but let's maintain some of the mystique, some of the image, in order so that you don't lose that. And it's a very complicated conversation, right? Like, who do you want to lose faith in? Where should you lose faith? Is it in a person, or is it in your belief system and all that kind of stuff? And again, Rian Johnson, I love his brain. You know, when you're like, I would love to sit down and talk to your brain. I think he's an incredible writer, and he really understands it, and he got done dirty by Star Wars because it's a great film, and he really, really understands what he's writing and the conversations he's having, even if not everybody watching the films understands that's the conversation he's having. Yeah. And that's fine. You can just watch them as fun detective films. You really, really can, you know.
I think what I love about the third one, and this is part of the video essay I'm actually in the middle of writing, is about how basically the all the characters involved have these different things that they have faith or belief in. And it's something that Judd talks about very openly. And there's one of my favorite scenes. I've got many favorite scenes in that. I can pick this movie apart separately for ages, because I did a whole video essay just around the scene where Father Judd is on the phone with Louise. That's the entire video essay is about that scene, because it's just so beautiful. It's
wonderful.
It's so beautiful. And
the moment he closes the door and he just takes the conversation away is...
It's gorgeous. It's beautiful.
So well done. Yeah, no, it's so clever. It's so well done.
But there's another scene. My other favorite one is the first one where Benoit Blanc comes into the church and he's meeting Father Judd for the first time. And Benoit's kind of looking around, and Father Judd says, you know, it's beautiful. You can really feel him here, can't you? And Benoit Blanc goes, oh God, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. Because Benoit Blanc is not a Christian, and he does not believe. Yeah. And Father Judd says, well, tell me what you feel. And he starts talking about the architecture, and then that leads him into a discussion of Christianity and how much he really dislikes it. And it's talking about, obviously, the homophobia that he clearly had to... He doesn't say this, but it's obvious that this is a huge element of it, of his relationship with the church and how he feels about it. And then he goes, oh, I'm sorry, you probably want to kick me out at the end of this. And Father Judd goes, no, like, you're speaking how you feel, and that's fine, and you're allowed to do that. And he goes, it is a story. It is all, we put on these robes, and we do this procession, and it's just a story, right? But is it a story that we do because of something physically there in the world, or is it because it speaks to something within us? And I think that scene is so beautiful as somebody who studies mythology. as like that is the thing, right? Because every person that you interact with, some of them are there for the thing, believing in the physical reality of the thing, and some of them are there for the story within. And there are differences there in that not everybody is believing the same. And I've talked extensively on this podcast before about how belief is a community pool. And it is kind of feeding into that, of showing how there's people that believe in different levels to different extents and in different things, even though they're all in the same church.
I think as well, there's the fact that at no point is any element of the belief demonized. Mm-hmm. You know, there are things about the organization that is the church that are discussed and talked about, the problematic elements and all this sort of thing, but the belief, the actual belief in religion, is not ever the problem. And I think that again is something that speaks to a level of nuance and understanding within all of these stories that Rian Johnson, and he has gone further into. I think Wake Up Dead Man, I think it almost stands above even the original movie, which is, sacrilege, as a piece of work. And obviously you have to have the others really to have it. No, not really, because again,
yes,
Benoit, he exists, it helps, but you don't need to know. You just know he's a famous detective. But kind of in the same way that books like The Murder on the Orient Express or the, Murder of Roger Ackroyd or The Hound of the Baskervilles stand apart from the rest of the canons, because it's almost like they have a different level of work, of understanding, of conversation within them. This one I feel is probably going to sit in that space. I can't, or he'll just get better and better and better and they'll all be brilliant. Who knows? But I think because of the sheer level of conversation and nuance, there is so much nuance in this film about belief and community and bringing people together and understanding of each other and being understanding of each other, even though you're coming from completely different points of view. Like, at no point do Judd or Benoit hate on each other or
No.
disagree with each other. They always find common ground with each other
They
because
disagree
they are,
on one important point, and it's a thing that I talked about in my video essay, because it's a point that everyone doesn't. Not everyone everyone in the show, everyone in the movie, doesn't understand about Father Judd. Basically, there's the phone call scene, so he kind of gives up the whole entire search for the real murderer to clear his name. He gives all of that up in order to pray for a woman who just really needs it. Is like going through it, and he decides to do that, and he leaves that call and tells Benoit, I'm done. I'm not doing this. I'll go to prison. I don't care. Like, I'm not doing this. I'm going to be a priest, and I'm going to do my job until they won't let me do it. And that's just what's going to happen. And they tell there's this whole kind of background to Father Judd, that he used to be a boxer, and he lived on the streets. He says that, and he was in the ring, and he hated this guy, and he killed him in the ring. And this is kind of his big moment of why he came to the church and how he transformed, and he's not violent anymore. And although he did punch a guy at the very beginning of the film, but it sounded like he deserved it. And but he's like, oh no, I'm not gonna fight. I'm not like that anymore. I'm not gonna do that. And he's non-violent despite being in this very verbally violent environment. But everyone always says that the reason why he does the things that he does, the reason why he protected the murder victim, the reason why he was there for Louisa, was as atonement. It was to make himself feel better. But he never says that. And this is the only argument he has with Benoit is he goes, why do you think I'm a priest? Why do you think I do this? And he goes, oh, because you're trying to atone. You murdered a guy in the ring and now you're trying to atone. And he goes, no. And each one of the people in the congregation are also saying, like, oh, because you're trying to atone. And he's having to constantly say, no, that's not what I'm doing. And I would love to go back through maybe just the script and try to find it. I don't think he mentions atoning or even God. I don't remember Judd mentioning God ever in the script. I'd have to go through and really be sure, but I don't think he does. Because for him, it's not about that. It's about living as example, and not for any other reason than just to do it. And again, I think it shows a real understanding, particularly of Christianity, in that is the point. Jesus lived by example, right? Like he mentions Jesus a lot. Yeah. And I think that's really interesting, is that he mentions Jesus all the time, but he does not all the time, you know what I mean? But he doesn't mention God. And I think it's because of this idea of living by example and just doing the thing. And if people follow and do it too, then that's great. But if not, whatever, let them. Yeah. I'm going to do what I can, and that's all I can do. Yeah. And that's all he does.
And again, it's even though that's the argument they have, I find it quite interesting that Benoit does respect it.
He does.
You know, he comes to an understanding of it, and then he takes some time.
Well, my favorite thing is it transforms him. So at the very end, he gives grace to the murderer. He decides not to do the big Agatha Christie-esque reveal in front of everybody in order to preserve what she wanted. And when he says, oh, I'm having my Damascus moment, and the police officer that he's working with is like, oh, so what, you believe in God now, and all of this is just out the window? And he goes, oh, no, not God. God didn't change me. It's Father Judd. And that, to me, is kind of the encapsulation of I could talk about this movie for ages. I loved it.
It like we talked about how much Rian Johnson understands his, I don't know, the genre, everything like that. But he also understands, I keep coming back to the word conversation. He understands the conversation he is having to a point that I don't necessarily think the audience always does. And that the audience has to come back several times to gain it, like, and to see where he's coming from. Because it wasn't until the second time that I really understood that final scene. I mean, you know, I was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, so Father Judd's changed more. And it wasn't until I watched it the second time to see those moments of change happening, that Benoit is letting go of his, almost like his pride in who he is, because he's the big bombastic guy. In Glass Onion, he's like, this is just stupid, and you know, all that kind of stuff, and how he saves Marta in the first one, which is really putting her in harm's way, you know, that he lets go of that element of himself, which is being the great detective. He has to let go of his ego and humble himself. And that is a really, really interesting thing to do without it then saying, because I now believe in God, which is not what happens. He's saying, I have taken the lesson from this person and their beliefs. I don't believe what they believe, but the lesson is still important. That's so big to do. So few people are capable of doing that, or would be able to talk about it like that. And there are very few pieces of media that talk about it like that. To do it in a detective film with a guy with a terrible southern accent, like, is astonishing. You know, like, you're not expecting that message to come from this film. You're really not. And it's why I'm kind of like, is he going to be able to do another one that sits as well as this one, that rises above this one as a piece of work? I don't know if he will. I think they'll still all be great, but I think this one may well be The Murder on the Orient Express, or
maybe
The Hand of the Baskervilles.
Although
maybe.
I would have
think
thought
it's
that
going to be the one
of Knives Out, to be honest, because especially after the second one, I was like, well, Knives Out was just so beautifully executed. It was just a perfect film. And then he did Wake Up Dead Man, so I don't...
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Rian Johnson is an incredible writer and director, and he obviously... we haven't really talked at all about Daniel Craig, which is what I wanted. Daniel Craig in this role. Daniel Craig played James Bond, one of the most iconic characters for years, and yet this is the role that he has defined himself in. You played the machoist of macho men for years, redefined James Bond, let's be honest, really, really did. As a character, did a lot of work with that. And yet, playing Benoit Blanc, who is in many ways, flamboyant, bombastic, queer man, who's a little bit fucking strange, you know, and definitely not who you would have thought Daniel Craig, given his previous body of work, would be playing. And it's brilliant. It's genuinely brilliant. And I think that him and Rian Johnson are an incredible team. You can clearly see they work well together. Every cast is brilliant, but them at the core of it, the two of them, they really understand what it is they're making and what they're doing, and they're having fun with it as well. Glass Onion, as we both said, it is the weakest of the three, and yet it has some of the most iconic moments in it. The moment of him walking into the pool in that, like, swimsuit thing that he's wearing.
It's beautiful.
It's so funny. And then him smoking the cigar and it setting off all the alarms. It's funny. The other thing about these movies is they are funny.
They are funny.
There are moments in them that are genuinely funny. And that, and again, a level of understanding that detective fiction is stupid is, you know, you kind of go, this is also stupid. You know, this is not how crimes are solved. This is, you know, you're living in a slightly odd space of, like, pseudo-reality with detective fiction, I think. And they are funny. I will never forgive any of the male creators of Sherlock Holmes media who do not understand that Sherlock Holmes is funny, because he is and the books are, and you all need to get fucked for taking that away from me.
It's why I don't like the Kenneth Branagh Poirot, and David Suchet is just great, because David Suchet is so funny. Because Poirot is
and
funny.
Poirot's ridiculous.
Oh, he's so fucking full of himself.
Oh, I know. And you have to keep that. And if you don't allow a level of absurdity in these characters, it doesn't work. And Rian Johnson and Daniel Craig really understand that he needs to be slightly... he just needs to be absurd. Yeah. He needs to be sitting sad in a bath, eating cake, playing...
Among Us.
Among Us. On a tablet while his husband, who is Hugh Grant, by the way, you know, is making bread in the other room. That's what's happening in that scene. I love it. Also, I love the fact that it's Hugh Grant. That Hugh Grant went, yeah, I'll do that. That sounds really fun. I'll be married to Daniel Craig. And then in an interview for another movie, was like, yes, I'm married to James Bond. At which Chris Pine had to do a double take because he couldn't work out if that was real or not. And then had to be explained to that this was in another movie, that Hugh Grant was married to Daniel Craig. And, you know... I love all
I mean,
of that.
like, even in the first film when you have who played the murderer? It was one of the...
Oh, it's Chris Evans.
Yeah, I would say it was one of the, because he was like big, he was like built because he was in the middle of doing all of
Captain
the
America,
superhero movies, and so they had to put him in these really big bulky sweaters because to try to hide the fact that he's just fucking ripped.
Which is so funny as well, because Daniel Craig is also, having come off playing James Bond, he was big, right? In that first movie, he is a lot wider than he is later, because obviously he's no longer playing James Bond and doesn't need to maintain that level of absurd musculature.
The way that they put him in these like flared suit trousers in the third movie,
and he chose that. He chose
beautiful.
He literally went, I want to look like this, and his dress and the costume department went, absolutely.
I love those trousers.
He sent them pictures on Pinterest.
I love those trousers.
It's so good. It's so funny. And he literally his wardrobe becomes more and more absurd as the movies go on. And I'm not gonna, as a kind of meta thing, I love how many people who really enjoyed the first movie and, really couldn't cope with the fact that he was gay. They really couldn't cope. Like, you've made his whole thing, he's so flat, you changed him completely. And I'm like, we didn't know who this person was. You literally just assumed he was still James Bond because it was Daniel Craig. And because your world is heteronormative.
You're saying that somebody that is going to go on about a fucking donut hole while he's singing in the side, like, with a tape player?
Yeah. He's singing show tunes in the first movie. Did you think he was straight?
And then my favorite scene in the third one is when they get into his car, and it's like this really tense moment where he was like breaking Judd out from the thing, and they get into his car and they turn it on and it's blasting cats. It's blasting cats.
Oh my god! You know what we should do is, I know you've watched them recently for a video essay, but we should just do a movie marathon of them, because they're so
I'm not
good.
upset about watching them again.
No, they're so funny and so good, and I have to say I also really love this whole thing in I would say Hollywood, but I think it's kind of Hollywood adjacent spaces where these guys have been playing action stars or whatever are just going, I want to do something else, and I want to do something really, really different now.
Yeah.
Which is quite nice and good for them. Everyone go watch Knives Out. If you didn't watch it at the beginning when we told you to watch it, you should definitely be watching it now, because we have spoiled these fucking...
I think we didn't spoil too badly.
We kind of didn't give away a single soul.
Oh, well, I mean, I did by saying that Chris Evans was the...
Oh, yeah, okay, apart from Chris Evans. But, like, let's be fair, that one is not obvious. Like, you kind of go, oh, yeah, it was definitely that guy. He sucks, quite quickly into the movie. Which, again, is part of the whole plot, that you can kind of guess that it's him. Watch them. If you haven't watched them, do. If you have, watch them again. They're great.
Watch all
we need them to be released.
Watch all my video essays.
Watch Vivian's video essays. Yeah,
I'll link
we need
every
them to
single
be
one of
released
them
in cinema.
So I did one on Knives Out and Glass Onion, where I talked about the structure of the whodunit. Wake Up Dead Man was not out at this point, so that's why it is only those two films. Although I did very much focus on the first one. I did one on nostalgia and Rian Johnson, which is briefly what I talked about here, but way more in detail. That one covers primarily, again, Knives Out, but it does all three of them. And then I did one on reciprocity, which is the gift-giving theories in anthropology and how it cannot cope with the Christian understanding of grace, and how that is represented in Wake Up Dead Man. And then I'm in the middle of writing, although I can't remember if this will be out by then or not. If not, you be looking out for it, is I'm going to be doing one on mythology, ritual, and belief in Wake Up Dead Man.
Ooh.
So yeah, there's a whole host of Knives Out content for you.
Go watch it all. We will link them below. We will link Vivian's channel so you can go and see them. And thank you so much for listening. This has been a brilliant and in-depth discussion about our favourite thing.
Yeah.
I think. So we will be with you soon. You will hear us again. Like, subscribe, share with your friends, write reviews, do all that shit. Subscribe on every platform you can, just for numbers. I don't know. Bully people. It really helps us if you share and like and all that kind of stuff. So thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye bye.